How's it going, guys? I am Mike once again bringing to you a lecture on Bourdieu and his extremely famous and very important article, The Economics of Linguistic Exchange. So, this video will be in two parts, basically dividing this article in half. Now, I'm going to focus on the underlying concepts that I think that if you really got these concepts down, the article will be way easier to understand. So I'm not going to highlight and translate individual sentences like I usually do, but I'll give you the stuff you need to make these horribly long sentences actually make sense. So I'll give you a frame of reference so that you don't go into this and get lost like within the first few sentences the way I did the first few times that I read this particular article. So let's first talk about the title. What does that mean? Economics of Linguistic Exchange. So the word economics comes from Bourdieu's idea of the economy of practices, which is related to one of Bourdieu's main theoretical orientations that all action is in some way guided by interest. This is not so much the fully conscious means-ends type of rational calculation. This is more referring to a relatively pre-reflexive level of awareness, which is also related to his notion of strategy. It's the idea that actors attempt to find advantages in particular situations. But again, Bourdieu's idea of strategy is not necessarily calculated pursuit, but more so decisions made in everyday life that we may or may not be aware of. So right off the bat, this has nothing to do with that line of theory called rational actor theory. Not related to that stuff at all. Okay, I'm back. So I had to press pause because there was a damn police siren going on for the whole first part that I was talking. Anyways, okay, so the next phrase, linguistic exchange. So this refers to the idea that even language can be a rare good worthy of being sought after. Hence, language can potentially be leveraged in the pursuit of economic or symbolic profit. So we know Bourdieu has a lot of forms of capital, which are resources that can be exchangeable. So cultural capital, for example, an Ivy League college degree might at some point land you a job where you can cash in that cultural capital for economic capital. Now, linguistic capital would definitely fall under the realm of cultural capital and symbolic capital, as we will see. Okay, so this article, Bourdieu is responding to what he sees as an extremely limiting but totally hegemonic view of language, or specifically the conceptualization of language as a mere vehicle of information. So what does that mean? It's the idea from linguistics that language can be reduced to its referential function, meaning individual words stand in for things in the world. So you have the word chair for the thing chair, right? So words match up with stuff in nature. So in other words, there's information held within each word and we exchange this information. This is what language is primarily used for, to communicate information. But that's an ideological stance. This ideological stance separates language from the material world, from the political and economic conditions that make language possible, and puts it into this realm of ideas, this totally and completely abstracted realm, separated completely from social life. But very quickly, we can see that words act upon the world. They aren't just used to exchange information. So think of a minister saying, "I now pronounce to you husband and wife." And from that moment on, reality has changed. But not anyone can say those words and have it mean anything. It's got to be a minister backed with all of these credentials. He can't just, scream these words to random people on the street either, and then all of a sudden they're married, right? It's got to be in a legitimate setting. So the words, I pronounce you, blah, 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 the words alone don't have the power to bring into being a marriage. There's an entire field of relations that the minister must navigate to achieve the authority and legitimation to actually have the power to marry people. Now, according to Bourdieu, linguists like Chomsky and Saussure have fully abstracted language from real life. So they've taken out language from real life. Chomsky's idea of competence is a person's ability to create grammatical sentences. Bourdieu, however, puts language back into social life and says speaking competently requires a person to know when and where and how to speak appropriately. So it's not just about grammatical correctness. So there are assumptions held within the linguist's conception of language. Or rather, the linguists ignore what is necessary to make the language that linguists study even possible in the first place. The language being the system that they study. For example, the entire system of grammar is based off of a speaker, obviously, but it also assumes that there's a listener. Meaning it assumes the speaker that's speaking is legitimized to speak and to be listened to in the first place. What this also means is there are people that are perceived to speak grammatically and appropriately while others are not. Now, linguists describes those people's speech and pretends that there are no power relations that say this is correct or this is incorrect. Now, linguists will say this is grammatically correct because we are scientists who study language and grammar and the grammar system objectively and abstractly. And according to this data, the rules of grammar say this is grammatical, right? On the other hand, moving down in the article to the section called authorized language, what is correct or okay to say in any given situation is directly related to the symbolic capital a speaker holds. Or better yet, the relation of symbolic power held between the speaker and the symbolic power of the listener. Symbolic capital can be thought of as legitimacy. So your professor in school holds the symbolic capital to speak and to impose reception. Part of competence is knowing how to use your information and how to impose your information onto a listening audience. These are all relevant aspects to language that is generally ignored by linguists. Okay, so now we get into how a language becomes valuable. On page 652, he says languages are worth what their speakers are worth. So while languages are all equal in complexity and degree of organization and systematicity, languages of subordinated groups are not perceived as equal to dominant languages. So there's a lot of stuff in this paragraph, but let's think of the idea of standard English. Let's think of the myth of standard English, actually. So this is the idea that there's a particular dialect of an idealized speaker, who doesn't exist, by the way, but speaks some uniform, standard, correct form of English. This standard perfect English is what, for example, people with accents are measured against, or or the grammar of varieties of, let's say, something like Black English or Southern dialects. This standard English was created by linguists when they were describing what English was doing, indirectly creating rules of acceptability, not just grammaticalness, acceptability and correctness. Notice the feeling of the word correctness versus grammaticalness. When we say something is right or wrong, that almost always smuggles in ideas about morality. So we should probably ask at this point, whose English were the linguists using for their model, for their abstract model? It was probably an upper middle class, educated, white English register, no doubt. Definitely not the language of, let's say, a country western singer who uses double negatives all over the place. Definitely not that guy. Nevertheless, the language of grammarians is what we learn in school. So this ideal standard variety of English has been backed by the legitimacy of the entire American education system. The whole thing is backing this idea. Okay, so right here we're going to pause, and then I'm going to come back and do from pages 653 onward. So I will see you in a couple minutes.